I'm sorry, but I've got some really terrible news to share. If you haven't seen it yet, I'm sorry, I'm just really shaken up. Valve killed Purple Lane. If you haven't seen, Deadlock just got a huge update and a lot has changed. Mostly the map. They removed an entire lane, made the jungle bigger to fill the space, moved Midboss underground, and they made things pretty. Ooh. But in addition to all of this, they also snuck in some huge changes that have a pretty big impact on how you should be playing the game. So if you're wondering how all of this affects you, other than having to zipline on a line that looks like it was drawn with the smallest possible pencil in Microsoft Paint, have I got the video for you. Seriously though, I do not understand why they put the ziplines on Ozempic. So because they removed solo lanes, every lane now is a duo lane. This means that it's a lot harder to gank than it used to be, or at least to gank and make it still be worth. Basically before, you could rotate off of a duo lane to a solo lane, and you could try to kill the solo laner there. And this was good because you could go and you could get the kill, and then once you arrived at that lane, there would only be 2 of you in that lane. You guys could both farm the minions together, and then those souls would duplicate. But now, if you're going from a duo lane to another duo lane, you're turning that duo lane into a triple lane, and when you do that, the souls stop duplicating and they start splitting between all 3 of you instead. Basically, this means that you're missing out on the souls that you would be getting duplicated from your duo lane. So unless you're pulling up to that other lane and killing both people, it's generally not worth it. In addition to that, it's a lot harder to rotate between lanes now than it used to be because there's only 3 and they're so much farther apart than they were. So ganking early is really, it's definitely not as effective as it used to be. Generally, you're gonna find yourself where you want to stay in your lane a lot longer because you want those souls to duplicate, right? Another really interesting change that they added is that now when you kill a candle trooper, you don't need to last hit it to get the souls. You only need to be close enough in order to get them. This is kind of an interesting change because it means that you don't need to focus on last hitting quite so hard. And instead what you can focus on is denying the soul orbs that come out of the minions. They made them a little bit bigger and they made them disappear a little bit faster, I think. They've also changed how many souls from the Candle Trooper go into the orbs. For a while there, they were doing like a 40-60 split where if you kill the minions, you get 60% right away and 40% go into the orbs. They were just at a 35-65, but they have changed the amount of souls that go into the orbs when you kill a Candle Trooper. Now, when you kill a Candle Trooper, you get 50% of the souls right away for killing, or when it dies near you, I guess, not for killing it anymore. And 50% of the souls go into the orb. So this means that denying souls is back, baby. We're back. I kind of like this mechanic. Not everybody's a huge fan, but I'm kind of a fan of it. And because you don't have to last hit anymore, you really should be focusing on it as much as you can. I've talked about this in videos before, but if you're denying soul orbs from an enemy, you're basically stealing them from them, right? Because if those soul orbs were gonna pop by themselves, those enemies get that many souls. But if you deny them, you're taking that many away and gaining that many, so you're kind of like, it's worth double the advantage that other sources of farming would give. So they're really good. You should be really focusing that in lane. Another thing you want to be careful of is they've expanded the jungle a lot, right? So there's a lot more medium camps than there used to be. There's a lot more kind of things around your lane that can sort of distract you. Camps are good, but they shouldn't take away from your farming. If you're not near your lane and getting your duplicate souls, generally that's bad, right? Medium camps, they spawn in at 5 minutes. One medium denizen in the jungle is worth 80 souls. One Candle Trooper at 5 minutes is worth 81 souls. So unless you're going and you're farming the medium camps super fast, it's not really worth leaving your lane in order to do it before 8 minutes because the souls you get from duplicating your wave will be a lot more. So that kind of brings the question, when should you look to go farm those camps? Well, generally it's when you've pushed up your lane enough to where there's no minions to be farming, right? If you and your lane partner have pushed up to the enemy guardian and you don't think that you can take their guardian, you should essentially both always split off and go start farming something. Like maybe one of you goes and breaks some crates, the other person goes to take a camp, right? Or both of you can go to take a medium camp, you can speed it up, you can split the souls, and then you're both back to lane faster. These changes kind of, because every lane is a duo lane now, I think hopefully it promotes a lot of teamwork with your duo partner. And I'm kind of interested to see how the meta develops around that. I don't know, there's a lot of interesting changes, but yeah, if you push your lane out, you really want to be going to farm these camps together, probably, in order to get back to your lane faster and start duplicating those souls again. The worst thing you can do, really, is have it so that one person leaves to go farm a camp, and that camp is too far enough from the wave, and the other person's still sitting on the wave and hitting it so that the minions die faster and whatever. Because you're essentially, you know, blocking, either the person sitting on the wave should try and slow down and wait for that other person to come back, or the person who left should try and farm something that's closer to the wave. You should really try and understand the distance, the maximum distance you can be away from a wave and still get those duplicated souls. Like for instance, there's the medium camp on the outer lane that's like up on the roof of the building. You don't get the duplicate souls from the wave unless the wave is essentially under your guardian. So that's an option where maybe one person's farming the medium camp above, the other person's kind of collecting the souls by the guardian. But in a case where, you know, the wave was pushed up a little bit further, you should never be on that camp taking the medium camp, because you're going to be spending this time to get a resource that you could just be getting more just being in the wave. So once 8 minutes passes, that's when the laning phase ends. If you don't know why, that's because souls stop duplicating and they start splitting instead. I think it's like if there's 2 people in the lane, both people get 60% of what the maximum amount of the candle trooper worth. It's something like that. I don't know the exact percentage, but that's obviously less souls than one person would get, you know, farming the waves, and another person would get running into the jungle. So generally after 8 minutes, you're gonna want to send one of your laners into the jungle, preferably whoever is going to be doing it faster. Something to consider though is that you still want somebody in the lane to still collect the waves, right? They did this thing where after 8 minutes, they've upped how much candle troopers are worth. I did some research and it looks like they've upped it by about 33%. Actually, they said an insane thing. Let me look at the update. So yeah, they said, and I quote, increased post-laning trooper bounty to match the previous 4-lane global economy, which sounds like something you would read on like a business statement from a company, but it's basically just a thing saying that after 8 minutes, they've increased the value of candle troopers, because before there were 4 lanes that you could go farm souls from, and now there's only 3, right? They've increased it by about 33%, 32%, around there. So candle troopers are worth even more than they used to be. And if you watched the last video I posted, you know that they are already worth quite a bit, especially in comparison to jungle farm, right? Generally. Another interesting thing that they've done to jungle farm, so because they've made the jungle bigger, they've added a lot more camps. They have nerfed the amount of souls that you get from jungle farm by 10%. So again, if you watch my last video, this means that jungle is worth even less than it was before, and it should move even farther down on your priority list than it was. Your priority list you need to be prioritizing candle troopers over jungle whenever you can. Obviously, if there's somebody in a lane collecting the candle troopers, that's when you go prioritize jungle. That's when you go do other things. Objectives as well. I played a few games yesterday to kind of test out the changes, and the amount, just because the jungle is bigger, does not mean you should be spending more time in it. They made the souls worth, they made you get less souls. They made you get less souls from the jungle. You need to be focusing on objectives still. You need to be taking guardians, you need to be breaking walkers, you need to be collecting candle troopers, and you need to be going for mid-boss and earn. You need to prioritize those. Drop jungle when your team's going for one of those. Trust me, you will get way more souls from any of those objectives than you will from any jungle camp. Your focus needs to be in the right place, okay? If you want to know why, if you want to get into the specific soul amounts, you can watch, again, the last video I posted. It goes into that pretty well. But speaking of objectives, this is a good way to segue into how the map changing affects them. One objective that is pretty heavily impacted by the changes that they've made is walkers. Because they've gone from having 4 walkers to 3 walkers, they've increased their health a lot, you know, because there's less of them. But they haven't increased the amount of souls they're worth. They still give your team 4,500 souls. So it's kind of interesting because there's less of them, so they're easier to protect, right? Because there's, you're not trying to protect 4 of them at once, you're only trying to protect 3. And they have more health, but they're still worth the same amount of souls. This basically means that they're harder to split push for. Before, it was pretty easy, relatively speaking, to split push for one of the outer walkers. Now it's going to be a little bit harder. And the fact that they are harder to split push for means that generally, unless you see a lot of enemies on the map, you shouldn't really go for it that early. It's hard to say because the first walker now gives a flex slot, right? It used to be you have to take 2 walkers to get a flex slot. Now it's only the first walker. So that first walker is worth a lot. And if you have a chance to break it, you should really prioritize it. Like, it might be worth putting like 2 or 3 people, you know, shoving down a lane to prioritize it. But after that, the second 2, I'd say you should definitely prioritize things like urn over them because they are going to be a lot harder to break. I think urn stocks are basically going up. Urns are should be more of your focus than even they were before, because those are going to be your easiest way to get those big chunks of souls without having to break a walker. So I think prioritizing urns should definitely be on your list. Like second and third urn, especially the 15-minute, the 20-minute ones, the ones that are worth like about as much or more than a walker, those ones should really be high priority for you to take. I'm actually working on a video right now about urns. It's taking me a little while because the urn comeback mechanic is very secretive for some reason. Like, there's a bunch of sources that talk about it, but there's no sources that like get into it. And it's really hard to research because it's like variable based on how far behind you are. So if anybody has any information on that, please help. I'm losing my mind trying to research urns, and I would appreciate any help. So let me know in the comments if you know anything about the urns comeback mechanic. But the last objective I want to talk about, and the one that is probably most heavily affected by the changes to the map, is Midboss. So the lanes being changed from 4 to 3 has done some really interesting things to rotating around the map. Primarily now, it's arguably easier to rotate between the outer lanes than it is to the middle lane, right? Because the outer lanes, you can teleport from one lane to the other with a teleporter, but the middle lane is, you know, it's a lot more isolated than it used to be. So naturally, you know, if it's harder to rotate to the middle of the map, that means it's better to take the objective that's in the middle, right? Because it's harder for the enemies to rotate to you to stop you. Another thing is that by moving Midboss underground, it's a little bit harder to get to than it was when it was in the museum. Now you have to, you know, you have to go to one of the entrances, and they're both kind of a little bit awkward. You have to like drop down to another level to, you know, get above it like you used to. It's just a little bit weirder. It's a little bit harder to get there fast in order to like go for a rejuve steal or something. So Midboss is arguably safer than it used to be. Another thing is that with 4 lanes, you used to have 2 lanes that ran basically right around middle. This meant that if you were doing Midboss, let's say the enemy team was doing Midboss, and one of those 2 lanes you didn't have pushed, it was pushed towards you. But your second one was pushed towards where it was around the middle. You could just zip line down that second one, and then all of a sudden you were next to Midboss. You could go, you could fight it, you could go for a rejuve steal. Now, there's only the one lane, there's only the one zip line there. So basically, you can push down that middle lane, and if you push it far enough to where the enemy zip line doesn't extend to where Midboss is, and then you go and you do Midboss, it is so much harder for the enemy to, you know, assemble their team there quickly. Midboss is a much safer objective to take as a result, and I think people should be going for it a lot more. I think the community is kind of, like, even before this change, has been pretty scared of going for Midboss generally. I don't know why this is kind of in the community. I feel like people will, there's so often where I'll call, hey guys, let's do Midboss, we have enough advantage for it, and people will go, no, I don't think we should, you know, I'm farming the jungle, I'm doing this. We need to be going for Midboss more, right? Just as a community, Midboss is not actually that hard to kill. They did just buff the health a little bit on this patch, but with a bunch of teammates, it's usually actually not that hard to kill. It's just getting all of those teammates there. And, you know, that doesn't happen as often unless there's kind of a communal mental shift. So that's one of the things that making it safer, and me saying that it's safer in this video, go for it more often. Go for it more often. It is so frustrating how scared people are of that objective. And with these changes, you should be going for it a lot more. The last aspect I want to talk about that I think a lot of people are going to miss with this change is how this change affects vision on the map. So vision is kind of weird in Deadlock, as opposed to some other MOBAs where you can buy things like wards and stuff like that and put them places in order to kind of see where enemies are and get more information. Deadlock doesn't really have that. Most of your vision comes from candle troopers. So by taking out one of the lanes, one of the things that they've essentially done is they've removed some of the vision on the map. Because there's less waves that will be pushed and there's less minions to catch, there will be less people who go and shoot those waves and reveal themselves on the minimap. In addition to that, without the extra lane, the jungle's a lot bigger, and there's a decent chance people are going to be spending, you know, a solid amount of time in there. And obviously, it's pretty hard to see players when they're in the jungle unless you're like nearby them. Considering these changes, I think it's more important than ever to remember that vision is a type of resource, right? It's a type of information that you have that allows you to go for plays. For instance, let's say you're trying to split push for a walker, but there's only like one enemy showing on the map. It's way more risky for you to try to split push for that walker because you don't know where people are, right? There could be 2 or 3 enemies that are gonna pull up and are gonna kill you and stop you from taking this walker. The same thing kind of for taking fights or for going for earn or for things like that. Vision is just a very powerful information tool, and now that there's less of it on the map, it becomes even more important. So if you see on one side of the map, like in that example I was just talking about with the walker, maybe those 3 people pull up to go kill your teammate. Well, now you know that there are 3 people on that side of the map. And you know that with the lanes being changed and everything being more spread out, it is harder to rotate than it's ever been. So maybe when that happens, you do something like you call Midboss because you know that 3 people are stuck in one lane. Maybe you go for an earn. That's a little bit of a rougher example because, you know, the teleporters exist and making plays on the edges of the map is a little bit harder because it can be easier to rotate. Basically, if you see that the enemy team is skewed to one side of the map or the other, you kind of want to be doing things on the other side of the map, like maybe you're taking a walker or maybe you're in mid lane pushing down or something like that. You want to use that information to your advantage. The place where vision is most important is in late game, right? Because late game is so often decided on which team finds picks first. So knowledge on where people are is really important for finding, you know, who's isolated, who can we go kill without, you know, while we still have a numbers advantage. This is actually another reason why I think Midboss is an even better objective than it was before, is because you can almost use Midboss like a vision tool. Because Midboss buffs your candle troopers and makes them push forward on their own, enemies will have to come out and go deal with those waves, right? And when they do that, they should show on the map. So it gives you information on where people are, and it also requires people to split up more in order to deal with the waves, so it gives you more picks and stuff like that. Other options late game, because there's less vision for going for picks, you know people are gonna be in the jungle generally, that's where it's hard to find vision. You can kind of sneak through the enemy jungle, and if you take high ground or you listen for people taking camps, or you can look on the mini-map. If you're in the enemy jungle, you can see camps near you and you can see them disappear off the mini-map. You can communicate to your team, hey, I just saw this person or heard this person right here. Let's get a few people over here, we can get a pick. I think this is kind of a playstyle that's slept on right now, for sure. I think you'll be surprised by the amount of games that you can win in a late game scenario just by kind of sneaking around and finding a pick. Again, jungle camps are worth even less than they used to be worth, and unless you're specifically farming for an item you need or something like that, it is way more worth it in a late game scenario to be looking for those picks as opposed to be like sitting in your jungle farming something. So I need to reiterate this before the video ends. Do not get distracted by the jungle. Even though it's bigger, even though there are more camps, even though they spawn faster, they are worth less, and honestly, they will lose you games by taking too much of your focus. Focus on the things that matter. Jungle, bottom priority, bottom priority. If you learned anything in this video, make sure to like and subscribe. I know I was kind of yapping. It's a little bit of a different style than the other videos I've done, but not all my videos can be those super high edited, really takes a long time to put together kind of a thing. So let me know if you like this one in the comments. Like I said earlier, I am working on that solar video, so keep an eye out for that, and I'll catch you all later.